Hello and welcome to Skills in Automation. My name is Ash and today we're going to look at one way to find the last row in a range of data. Specifically, we'll look at the find method of the range object to grab the last used row in our worksheet. Just a quick note, this slide will repeat in each of my videos on finding the last row since we'll follow the same format and cover the same examples in each video just with different techniques. Please skip to the next timestamp if you prefer. So, one of the most common tasks that you would come across in VBA is finding the last used row of a data range. Identify the full range of data that you may want to perform some task over. Example, to loop over the data, change formatting for the data, etc. Copy and paste the range of data elsewhere. This is a continuation of point 1, but a more specific and common example where you would want to copy the data and paste it into another worksheet or workbook. Paste new data at the bottom of our existing data. That is, we need to find the first row with unused data below our data range and paste in new data there. We will cover each of these 3 examples in this video. And just a bit of housekeeping, I want to mention that there are many ways of performing the same activities presented in this video. For this video, we will not spend much time discussing alternatives. This video is designed to deep dive into just the technique of finding the last used row using the Range.Find method. I have separate videos that discuss each alternative method and one video that briefly discusses all methods together and suggests which one to use and when. Please do check those out as well. Similar to other techniques of finding the last used row, we will first explore the find method in Excel. Let's go to our home ribbon, find and select find. Or we could arrive here using the shortcut Ctrl F. Let's expand these options. We see a lot of, options. We can access all of these options through VBA as well. But VBA has more options that are specifically geared to allow us to find the last used row or column. So let's dive into that code. Before we begin coding, I just want to mention that throughout this video, I will refer to the worksheet using the worksheet code name. So instead of going this workbook.sheets and the sheet name, we can simply use the worksheet code name directly. And the code name can be found in the properties of the worksheet right here. There are many benefits to this, but we won't get into it now. The find method is the most complete and efficient method for finding the last used row. However, there are a lot of arguments in the code, but if you can get past that, then this is the method to use. First, we'll declare a variable to hold the value of the last row number. Since we're going to search the entire worksheet, we will search all cells in our invoice worksheet. And then select the find method. And here are a list of options. There are 9 in total. We will only use 7. I've written all the options out. We can now go through them one by one. So what do we want to search? We want to search for any text or number. So we can use the asterisk symbol. Next, we want to start our search from the very first cell, which is range A1. Our 2 main options for what to look in is values or formulas. Choose this one carefully. If you want to find the last cell with data in it, choose Excel values. If you want to find the last cell, which can be a formula or a value, then choose Excel formulas. We will search for both. Next, we can match just a part of the cell or the whole cell. It doesn't really matter here because we're searching for any values. So we'll just choose part. For search order depends on whether you're searching for the row number or the column number. We want the row, so we will choose rows. The most option here is the search direction. You would be tempted to choose next, but that would just give you the next used row. To search for the last used row, we need to go in the opposite direction. So choose Excel previous. So just backing up on that one, we're starting a search from range A1 and our search direction asks us in which direction do we want to start searching. The options here are the next or previous. You choose next, the search is going to go from A1 to B1 to C1 to D1 until it hits the end of that row, and then it will go from A2, B2, C2 and so on. So that is the direction in which it will search, but we are searching for the next cell with any value. So if we choose next, the next cell with a value in it is cell B1. So that's where our search would stop. But we want the last used row or the last used cell, which in our case is cell J12 or row 12. So to do this, instead of searching like this, what we are going to say is Excel search backwards. So from cell A1, we will go all the way to the last row in Excel and the last cell at the right. So basically the intersection of the last cell and the last column. And now our search is going to begin in the opposite direction. So from this cell to this cell to this cell to this cell, all the way to the first cell in the last row. And if it doesn't find anything out there, it'll go to the next row, last cell out there, and begin a search until it comes to row 12. And it keeps searching from the left. Column O, nothing's found, N, nothing, M, nothing, L, nothing, K, nothing, and finally to J, and there is a value in it, and that's where our search will stop. And moving to the last option, match case. This can be true or false, but since we're searching for a wildcard, it doesn't really matter. We could just choose false. And lastly, we need to specify what we are looking for, and what we're looking for is the last row. And that's strange. This text is still red, which means that there is an error out here. I think I'll just close this gap. Okay, and let's print out these results in an immediate window. So our last row is 12, and let's run this sub and see what we get. It gives us the 12th row. Finding the last column is similar. So here's the code for that. The main thing we have changed is we're referring to the column property instead of row. Let's print this out, column 10, and our data extends up till column 10. And just one more thing to note out here. I have dropped the arguments look at and match case just to make this code a bit shorter, because these two arguments will not affect the end result of what we are going for. Now, let's look at a scenario where there is no data in this sheet. The find method will run into a runtime error. So there's no data in our invoice sheet now. Let's run this up and we immediately get an error. Let's end this. To get around this, we need to put in some error handling. So put in an error handling line out here. So if there is an error in any line after this statement, that particular line of code will be ignored and the code will jump to the next line of code. So in our case, our error is sitting in this line of code, and that is because find cannot return a blank range object. So this variable does not get populated and it remains as 0. And if that happens, that is if the variable retains the value 0, we will reset the variable to 1, which will return us the last row as row number 1, which will work for us. Okay, let's see this in action. We have no data in our invoice sheet. Let's run this code and we print out the answer as 1, which is fantastic. Let's populate the data back in again, run the code again. We get 12, which is the right answer. So if you want your code to be truly dynamic, you need to take into account scenarios where you may not have data in your worksheet. And in that case, you need to add in this bit of error handling. Okay, moving on to the examples. Let's identify this full data range and select it. And just to display how strong this technique is, we can add in some blanks in our data set. The Range.Find method will be able to accurately locate the last row in spite of all the blank columns that sit within our data set. Here we assume that we know that there is data in the worksheet, we just don't know where it is. To find the last cell, we need to find both the last row and the last column. We've gone through this code already. So here we find our last row and here we find our last column. Now for the first cell, in my other videos in finding last row, I've assumed that the first used cell is A1, and that's because it's not possible to easily get the first used cell using any other technique, but it sure is possible using the find method. So let's add a few blank rows above our first used row. Now we're going to ask our find method to search for the first used row and the first used column as well. The trick here is to start our search from the very last cell in our Excel sheet and search next instead of previous. Let's try that out. So here is our first row. The point to note out here is that when finding the last row, we start from the very first cell, which is A1. But when finding the first used row or first used column, we start from the last row. So here we're just counting the total number of rows in our worksheet. And for columns, we start from the very last column. And here again, we're counting the total number of columns in our worksheet. And our search direction is next. So to visually show what is going on out here, we're going to the very last row and the very last column. So we will be in this cell right here. And instead of searching backwards, as we did when finding last used row, we will search next. So our search will jump from this very last column to pressing Control Home to A1. And we'll keep searching right across every row till we find cell A4, which represents our first used row and our first used column. So that was the first used row. First used column is almost the exact same thing. Now let's go ahead and select our data range. So we will be on the invoice worksheet. We need to feed in the row index and the column index of the first used cell, which is first row and first column. And the last cell are the last row and last column. And what are we going to do with this range? We're going to select it. Okay, that was quite a bit of code. Let's run this and see if all this effort paid off. Beautiful. I can't describe how accurate this method is over the rest of the techniques. And I highly recommend this if you're not confident about where your data lies exactly within the worksheet. No matter where the data range starts from, first row, second row, third row, or the first column, second column, third column, and wherever the last row is, the find method will be able to accurately pinpoint the data range for you. But the code is a bit mouthful, and I agree with that. And that is why if you are confident with your data set, I would recommend using the easier techniques like Range.End or current region. But if your data set is a bit complicated, like this one is, there is no method better than Range.Find. Okay, moving on to the next example. Here, we'll identify a range of data as we did in the previous segment, and we'll copy it over to a new worksheet. Let's clear the contents in the destination worksheet first. Let's identify the range of data that we want to copy over. This time we'll keep it simple and assume that we know our data is within columns A and J. So we only need to find the last row. And let's copy our data range. So our range starts from cell A1 through till column J. And we can grab the last row from here. And we'll copy this range and paste it into a new worksheet into cell A1. And let's keep it tidy and auto resize the destination columns. Okay, let's run this. So this is our original data range and this is our destination worksheet, and we can see that our range of data has copied over. Great, moving on. Here we'll identify our first unused row after our range of data and paste in new data here. This is the data that we want to copy over. Let's find the last row of our original data set. This will give us this 12th row, but what we want is the next row, which is the first unused row, so that we can paste our new data starting from here. So what you can do is just basically add 1 to this. Now let's go to the last row of data that we want to copy over. We'll identify the last row in pretty much the same way. Let's copy this data range. Notice we're just copying the body of the data, so we are starting from cell A2 and not A1. And this will extend till the last row, which is basically this variable. We will copy this data range and paste it onto our invoice worksheet into column A and the cell which is in this last row. Okay, let's run this code. We can see that our new data has pasted right below our previous data set. And that's it for finding the last row using the find method. This is the most efficient way to find the last row, especially if your data is not continuous. That is, there are blanks in between. You can choose to find the last row with values or the last row with either formulas or values in it. This can be very handy sometimes. One drawback is the length of the find method, which can take up to 9 arguments. But if we can get past that, then this is a very efficient method. And as mentioned earlier, there are other ways to find the last row. I have separate videos on those, as well as a video combining and comparing different techniques. Please check those out as well. So, which method do you prefer and why? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. Thanks, and see you in the next one.